Hey everyone, welcome back to Speak Like a Leader podcast, your cozy space where we help you learn real, natural English through everyday conversations in a simple and enjoyable way.
And I'm Zoe, and we are really happy to have you here with us again, because this space feels special only because you are a part of it.
Before we start today's conversation, we just want to take a moment to genuinely thank you for being here, for listening, and for spending your valuable time with us every single day.
Yes, truly, thank you. Because every time you return here to learn with us, it makes this little learning journey feel more meaningful, more connected, and more alive.
And we also want to remind you something very important that many learners forget, which is that listening is not a passive activity. It is actually one of the most powerful skills in language learning.
Exactly. Because even when you feel like you are not improving, your brain is still quietly absorbing the rhythm, structure, pronunciation, and natural flow of English sentences.
You are training your ears to understand real conversations, not textbook English. And that means you are slowly but surely building real-world communication skills without even realizing it.
So, even on days when speaking feels difficult or slow, please don't think you are not progressing, because listening itself is already moving you forward in a very deep and natural way.
And if you have been learning with us for some time, and you have noticed even a small improvement in your understanding or confidence, we would honestly love to hear your story in the comments below.
Yes, and also tell us where you are listening from, because we genuinely love seeing how this small podcast connects people from completely different parts of the world.
All right, now let's move into something a little more real and relatable, because Zoe, I have to admit something before we start today's topic.
Oh no, that tone already sounds dangerous. But okay, go on. What happened?
Last night I made a very confident decision that I was going to sleep early. I even said it to myself seriously like a disciplined person. But somehow at 12:47 a.m., I was still watching a random video about building wooden cabins in Finland.
Wait, James, how did you go from sleeping early to becoming a Finnish cabin construction expert at midnight?
I have no idea. I don't even live anywhere near Finland. I don't build anything, and I don't even like mosquitoes. But somehow my brain thought that was the most important thing in the world at that moment.
That is exactly the problem with modern habits. Everything sounds simple when you plan it, but the moment real life starts happening, your discipline completely disappears.
And that's why today's topic is so important, because we are talking about healthy habits that can actually change your life, but not in that unrealistic, perfect morning routine kind of way that never really works in real life.
Yes, because real healthy habits are not perfect or aesthetic. They are messy, emotional, and deeply connected to your energy, your stress, and your real daily environment.
And many people think they don't have discipline. But the truth is, most of them already know what to do. They just struggle to actually do it consistently in a real and busy life.
Exactly, because knowing is easy, but doing is where everything becomes complicated, especially when your mood, energy, and distractions keep changing every single day.
And that's where identity becomes very powerful. Because when a habit becomes part of who you are instead of something you are trying to force, it becomes much more natural and long-lasting.
Like, instead of saying, I'm trying to be healthy, you start saying, I am someone who takes care of myself. And that small shift changes everything in a very deep way.
And another very important truth we need to understand is that healthy habits are not only about actions like exercise or diet, but they are actually deeply connected to identity, environment, emotions, and the way we respond to everyday life situations.
Yes, because the real problem is not that people don't know what is healthy. The real problem is that real life keeps pulling them in different directions every single day, making consistency extremely difficult.
And if we honestly look at it, most people don't fail because they lack information. They fail because their environment is silently working against them without them even realizing it.
Exactly. Like when unhealthy choices are easier, faster, and more available, your brain naturally goes for comfort instead of effort without even thinking deeply about it.
For example, your phone is always right next to you, your snacks are easily accessible, and distractions are literally designed to grab your attention every few seconds. So resisting them all the time is not just about discipline, it is also about design.
And that is why blaming yourself too much is not fair, because sometimes it is not about being weak. It is about being surrounded by systems that are constantly encouraging distraction and instant comfort.
And this is where a very useful idea comes in, which is that instead of trying to completely remove everything at once, we can simply cut back on certain habits in a realistic and sustainable way.
Yes, because cut back on means you reduce something slowly and realistically, not in a dramatic or impossible way, but in a way that actually fits your real lifestyle.
Like cutting back on endless scrolling, cutting back on unnecessary stress, cutting back on late-night screen time, or cutting back on constantly being available to everyone without giving yourself enough rest.
And that approach feels much more realistic, because it is not about punishment or pressure, it is about balance and small adjustments that your mind and body can actually handle.
I even remember trying to build a perfect routine once where I planned everything from waking up early, exercising, journaling, reading, and eating perfectly healthy meals. But after just a few days, I realized I was not improving. I was actually becoming more stressed and frustrated.
And that happens to so many people, because when routines become too strict and unrealistic, they stop being helpful and start becoming another source of pressure in your life.
That's when I understood a very important word, which is sustainable, meaning something you can actually continue for a long time without burning out or feeling overwhelmed by it.
And that completely changes your mindset, because instead of asking, what looks perfect, you start asking, what can I actually maintain in my real life without giving up after a few days?
And when you shift your thinking like that, you start valuing small but consistent actions, like a 10-minute walk you actually do every day, instead of a 1-hour workout that you keep postponing again and again.
And that's where moderation becomes very important, because moderation means balance, not doing too much, not doing too little, but finding a middle path that actually supports your life.
Because the truth is, dramatic changes feel exciting at the beginning, but real transformation happens quietly, through small habits that you repeat every single day without even noticing how powerful they are becoming over time.
And slowly, those small habits start building something very important inside you, which is self-trust, the feeling that you can actually rely on yourself and keep your own promises.
And even something as simple as going for a short walk every day or doing one small healthy action consistently can completely change the way you see yourself over time.
Because every time you keep a small promise to yourself, your mind starts believing that you are someone who can be trusted, and that is one of the strongest foundations for confidence.
But the most important part is not that you never fail. The most important part is that you always know how to come back after failing. Because real life is never perfect, and nobody follows a perfect routine every single day.
Yes, getting back on track is a skill, because it means you don't let one bad day or one mistake turn into a complete identity of failure. You simply restart and continue.
And that's why healthy habits are not about perfection. They are about resilience, which means your ability to recover, adjust, and continue even after difficult or messy situations in life.
And resilience doesn't mean being emotionally hard or strict with yourself. It actually means being flexible, like a tree that bends in strong wind but does not break.
Because a statue may look strong, but it breaks easily under pressure, while a tree survives storms by adapting and moving with the situation instead of resisting everything.
And that is exactly how healthy habits should work in real life. They should support you during good days and also protect you during difficult, emotional, or stressful days.
So at the end of the day, the real question is not, how do I become perfect? But, how do I take better care of myself in a realistic, kind, and sustainable way that actually works in my real life?
And that is a much healthier starting point, because when habits come from care instead of pressure, they feel lighter, calmer, and much more meaningful in the long run.
And before we end, just take a moment and ask yourself this simple question. What is one small habit that would make my life feel a little more peaceful, balanced, and cared for this week?
Not something extreme or impressive, just something gentle that actually supports you in your real, everyday life.
And when we talk about building a better life through habits, one thing we often forget is that modern life itself is constantly pushing us toward distraction, urgency, and instant comfort without giving us enough space to slow down and think clearly.
Yes, because everything around us is designed to be fast, convenient, and always available, which makes it really difficult for people to naturally choose slow, healthy, and intentional actions without feeling some kind of resistance.
Like we are constantly told to respond immediately, scroll more, watch more, order faster, stay connected all the time, and in that process, quiet and healthy activities start feeling harder, even though they are actually better for us in the long run.
And that's why many people feel like they are failing. But in reality, they are just living in an environment where unhealthy choices are made easier than healthy ones every single day.
And this is where the idea of cutting back on certain behaviors becomes extremely powerful, because instead of trying to completely change your entire lifestyle overnight, you start by gently reducing the things that drain your energy and attention.
Yes, because when you cut back on something, you are not forcing yourself into extreme discipline. You are simply creating space for better habits to naturally grow in your life.
For example, cutting back on late-night screen time can slowly improve your sleep quality. Cutting back on constant notifications can reduce mental stress, and cutting back on unnecessary scrolling can give you back hours of your day without you even realizing it.
And the beautiful thing is, these changes don't feel dramatic at first, but over time they completely change your mental clarity, your energy levels, and even your emotional stability in daily life.
And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about habits is that people believe they need a huge transformation to change their life, when in reality, small, consistent adjustments are far more powerful than big, temporary efforts.
Exactly, because a huge change might look impressive for a few days, but a small habit that you can actually continue for months or even years will always create deeper and more lasting transformation.
And that's why sustainability becomes such an important word in this conversation, because if something is not sustainable, it doesn't matter how good it looks on paper, it will eventually collapse under real-life pressure.
Yes, sustainable means something that fits your energy, your schedule, your mental state, and your real responsibilities, not an ideal version of life that only exists in imagination.
And once people start understanding this, they stop chasing perfect routines and instead start focusing on realistic systems that actually support their daily life without making them feel overwhelmed or guilty.
And that shift is very powerful, because suddenly habits stop feeling like pressure and start feeling like support, like something that is helping you instead of controlling you.
Another important point we need to talk about is emotional habits. Because many of our daily behaviors are not actually logical decisions, they are emotional responses to stress, boredom, loneliness, or mental fatigue.
Yes, like when people say, I am just lazy, but in reality, they are actually tired, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained, and their habits are just a way of coping with how they feel inside.
For example, scrolling on your phone for hours, eating unhealthy food late at night, or staying awake longer than needed is often not about pleasure, but about escaping uncomfortable feelings or trying to find quick relief from stress.
And that is why understanding your emotions is so important. Because if you only try to stop the habit without understanding the feeling behind it, the same behavior will keep coming back in a different form.
And sometimes the habit is not the real problem. It is actually the solution your mind has found for a deeper emotional need, even if that solution is not healthy in the long term.
Exactly. So instead of asking, how do I stop this habit? A better question might be, what am I actually trying to feel or avoid when I do this?
And when you start asking that question honestly, you begin to understand yourself on a much deeper level, because habits are often just reflections of your emotional state, rather than random actions without meaning.
And that understanding creates compassion, because instead of judging yourself harshly, you start seeing your behavior as something that is trying to communicate a need.
And once that awareness grows, change becomes much more realistic, because you are no longer fighting yourself, You are actually working with yourself to create better choices over time.
And that is where real growth happens, not in punishment or pressure, but in awareness, understanding, and small intentional adjustments that feel natural instead of forced.
And when we really understand habits at this deeper level, we start realizing that change is not just about discipline, but about awareness, patience, and learning how to work with our own emotions instead of constantly fighting against them.
Yes, because most people try to change their habits by force, but real change actually happens when you understand yourself better and slowly adjust your environment, mindset, and daily patterns in a more supportive way.
And that's why small actions matter so much. Because even a tiny habit done consistently every single day can completely reshape how you feel about yourself over time without you even noticing the transformation happening in the background.
Exactly. And people often underestimate small habits. But the truth is, your entire life is basically built on repeated small choices that you make again and again without thinking too deeply about them.
And once you start seeing life through that lens, you stop chasing extreme changes and instead start focusing on realistic improvements that actually fit your energy, your schedule, and your emotional capacity.
And that is where self-compassion becomes very important. Because if you are too harsh with yourself, you might get short-term motivation, but in the long run, you will feel drained and discouraged. And that's why I think the healthiest approach is not, how can I fix everything immediately? But rather, what is one small thing I can improve today that feels manageable and kind to myself? Yes, because when your habits come from kindness instead of pressure, you naturally become more consistent, more peaceful, and less likely to give up when things get difficult. And another powerful truth is that life will never be perfectly stable. There will always be stressful days, emotional moments, unexpected problems, and situations where your routine completely breaks down. But that's exactly why flexibility matters, because the goal is not to create a perfect routine that never breaks, but to build a system that helps you come back again and again after you fall off track. And that ability to come back is actually more important than never failing, because real strength is not about perfection. It is about recovery, adjustment, and continuation after difficulty.
Yes, and that's where resilience becomes so important. Because if you are resilient, you don't break completely when life gets hard. You bend, you adjust, and you slowly return to your balance again.
And I really like the idea that resilience is not about being strong like a rock, but more like being flexible like a tree that can move with the wind without breaking under pressure. Exactly, because a rock may look strong, but it can crack under too much pressure, while a tree survives because it adapts and moves with changing conditions instead of resisting everything.
And when we apply this idea to habits, it means that a good habit system should support you even during your worst days, not only when everything is going perfectly in your life.
Yes, because anyone can follow a routine when life is easy. But the real test is whether your habits still help you when you are tired, stressed, emotional, or going through a difficult phase.
And maybe that's the real reason why healthy habits can truly change your life. Not because they make you perfect, but because they slowly teach you how to live with yourself in a more gentle, stable, and understanding way over time.
And that is such an important realization. Because when you stop treating yourself like a project to fix and start treating yourself like a person to care for, everything in life starts to feel lighter and more manageable.
And when we go even deeper into this idea, we realize that most people are not struggling because they are incapable, but because they are trying to change their lives in a way that does not match their real emotional state, energy level, or daily environment.
Yes, because sometimes people set expectations for themselves that are based on motivation. But motivation is not stable. It comes and goes, while real life requires something much more consistent and grounded than just temporary energy.
And that is why systems matter more than motivation, because a system is something you return to even when you don't feel like it, while motivation is something that disappears exactly when you need it the most.
Exactly. And that's why building small systems like what I do when I wake up or what I do before sleeping is far more powerful than trying to completely change your entire personality overnight.
And when those systems are simple and realistic, they start becoming part of your identity without pressure, without stress, and without that feeling of constantly forcing yourself to do something difficult.
And over time, those small systems become automatic. And that's when real transformation happens. Because you are no longer relying on decision making every time. You are simply following a natural flow of behavior.
And I think another very important idea we should talk about is emotional energy. Because not all days are equal. Some days you feel strong and focused, and other days you feel completely drained without any clear reason.
Yes, and that's why rigid routines often fail, because they don't consider emotional reality. They only consider ideal conditions where everything goes perfectly according to plan.
And when people ignore their emotional energy, they start feeling guilty for not following their plans, even when their body and mind are clearly asking for rest instead of pressure.
And that guilt can actually make things worse, because instead of recovering, people start pushing themselves harder, which creates more stress and leads to even more inconsistency.
And this is where a very important shift happens. When you stop treating rest as laziness and start treating it as a necessary part of maintaining long-term consistency and mental balance.
Yes, because rest is not the opposite of productivity. It is actually part of productivity. It is what allows your mind and body to recover so you can continue functioning in a healthy way.
And when people finally accept that, they stop punishing themselves for needing breaks, and instead, they start designing their life in a way that includes recovery as a normal and natural part of the routine.
And that is where things start to feel much more sustainable, because you are no longer forcing yourself into burnout cycles. You are actually building a lifestyle that supports your long-term well-being.
And I think one of the most powerful realizations is that consistency does not mean doing everything perfectly every day. It simply means returning to your habits again and again, even after interruptions or setbacks.
Exactly, because life will always interrupt your plans. But what matters is whether you can gently come back without judgment, without drama, and without turning one difficult day into a complete identity failure.
Understand that, they stop saying things like, I failed again, and instead, they start saying, I got off track, but I can restart now, which is a much healthier and more realistic mindset.
And that mindset alone can completely change how someone approaches personal growth, because it removes shame and replaces it with clarity, patience, and self-understanding.
And maybe that's the real secret behind lasting habits. Not perfection, not intensity, but the ability to return calmly and consistently to what actually supports your life.
Yes, and when you live like that, even small habits start feeling meaningful. Because they are no longer about pressure or rules. They are about care, stability, and respect for your own well-being.
And slowly, you start noticing that your life feels less chaotic. Not because everything around you has changed, but because your response to life has become calmer, more intentional, and more balanced.
And that is where real transformation quietly happens. Not in big, dramatic moments, but in small, everyday choices that slowly shape who you become over time.
And when we look at everything we talked about today, we can finally understand that healthy habits are not about becoming a completely different person, but about slowly becoming more aligned with the kind of life you actually want to live in a realistic and sustainable way.
Yes, because at the end of the day, it's not about building a perfect routine or following strict rules. It's about learning how to take care of yourself in a way that feels natural, balanced, and emotionally supportive in your real, everyday life.
And that is why habits should never feel like punishment. Because the moment they start feeling like pressure or guilt, they lose their real purpose and become something you try to escape instead of something that supports you.
Exactly, because real growth should feel like support, not stress. It should feel like something that helps you breathe easier in your life, not something that adds more weight to your already busy mind.
And maybe the most important message from today's conversation is that you don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to take one small step in a better direction and allow that step to slowly build into something meaningful over time.
Yes, because even the smallest action, when repeated consistently with awareness and kindness, can completely transform your habits, your mindset, and eventually the way you see yourself in the world.
And if you ever feel like you are falling behind or not doing enough, just remember that progress is not always visible immediately. Sometimes it is happening quietly in the background, while you are simply trying your best every day.
And that is more than enough, because trying your best in real life is already a sign that you are moving forward, even if the changes are slow or not obvious yet.
So instead of chasing perfection, maybe the better goal is to build a life that feels a little more peaceful, a little more intentional, and a little more kind to yourself every single day.
And when you choose that path, you start realizing that health is not about pressure or control. It is about care, understanding, and learning how to live with yourself in a more gentle and balanced way.
And before we end today, just take a small moment and reflect on this one simple question. What is one habit that would make your life feel even slightly more calm, supported, and cared for this week?
Not something big or overwhelming, just something small, realistic, and kind that you can actually continue without stress or pressure.
Because in the end, it is not about how many habits you build. It is about whether those habits are actually making your life better in a real and meaningful way.
And that is the real beauty of it. Small changes, repeated with care, can quietly transform your entire life without needing any extreme effort or pressure.
And we hope this conversation helped you see habits in a slightly different way today, not as rules or restrictions, but as a form of self-care that grows with you over time.
Yes, and we really hope you remember this. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep coming back to yourself with patience, kindness, and understanding.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, for listening, learning, and spending this time together in this space we've built for English and real-life learning.
We truly appreciate you, and we hope you continue your learning journey with confidence, calmness, and belief in yourself.
Take care of yourself, stay consistent in your own way, and remember that small steps are still steps forward.
And we'll see you in the next episode.